The entire content of this Ardupilot tuning series is available in PDF format on my Patreon, and it really is the perfect companion to this course because you can have it beside you on your bench while you're tuning and refer to it to see what all the parameters are called and where you can change them and work through at your own pace rather than having to kind of skip through all the videos. If you'd like access to that PDF guide, I'll put a link down in the video description to my Patreon. Please check it out, and if you join at any tier, you'll get access to that guide immediately. Hi there everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be looking at tuning the autonomous navigation control loops in Ardupilot. That's the Loiter Controller, the vertical and horizontal position controllers, and the autonomous Waypoint Navigation controller as well. We're going to be looking at tuning not just the PID parameters that determine how these loops react to inputs, but also the higher level parameters that control the flight feel and overall performance of the drone in all of these different autonomous navigation modes. It's a lot to cover in one video, so I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's dive right into it. The content in this video is tailored for hobbyists looking to tune drones up to about an 8-inch prop diameter. If you're looking to tune much larger, heavier drones than this for commercial, industrial or other professional applications, then you will almost certainly benefit from the more advanced methods and techniques that I cover in my Ardupilot tuning course, and I'll put a link to that down in the video description. The first control loop we're going to look at is the Loiter Controller, and the Loiter Controller sits above the angle controllers for pitch and roll, and it converts target horizontal accelerations that come down from the horizontal velocity controller into target angles for the angle controllers to act on. Now, the Loiter Controller also contains several parameters which control how the drone moves, accelerates and brakes in loiter mode. And it's important to realize that the Loiter Controller doesn't have any PID gains in it because the relationship between the drone's angle and its horizontal acceleration is just a simple geometric relationship. It doesn't depend on any PI or D gains. So we're not going to have to tune the PIDs for the Loiter Controller, but we are going to have to look at these secondary parameters which control how the Loiter Controller behaves in order to get the right flight feel for the drone. All of the parameters we're going to be talking about today can be found in Mission Planner under the Config tab Full Parameter List, and then you can use the search box to zero in on the specific parameters that you need to adjust. Here are the parameters that you're going to need to be aware of. The first is Loit AC max, which is the maximum acceleration that the Loiter Controller is going to use to correct position errors. The higher this acceleration, the more rapidly the drone will move to correct position errors and the more aggressive it will be. Loit ang max is the maximum lean angle in position hold mode, and this is usually set equal to angle max so that the flight feel in stabilize, altitude hold and loiter mode is the same for the pilot because they have the same maximum tilt angles in all the modes. Loit brake accel is the maximum braking acceleration that the Loiter Controller will use when the stick is centered. So if you're flying along with the drone at a certain speed and you center the stick, the drone will brake to slow down, and the Loit brake accel parameter controls how aggressively it brakes. There's also a Loit brake delay if you wanted the drone to not respond immediately to centering the stick. In most cases, you're going to want to set this to 0 because there is nothing more scary for a pilot than requesting the drone to slow down and it not respond immediately. Loit speed is the maximum speed that the drone is going to travel in loiter mode. So at full stick deflection, that's how fast the drone is going to move. And Loit brake jerk is the maximum braking jerk. Now, jerk is the derivative of acceleration, and we're going to come across this with a lot of the other controllers. This effectively controls how quickly the drone reaches its maximum braking acceleration. So the higher the jerk value, the faster the drone will reach its maximum braking acceleration, and then it will slow down. I think it's easiest to understand these parameters by looking at them on a graph of speed versus time. So here we have the drone moving along at its maximum speed, so its loiter speed. Then on this yellow arrow, the pilot centers the stick. At this point, Loit brake delay controls how long the drone waits before starting to respond to the fact that the stick has been centered. So I would normally set this to 0, obviously, so that it responds immediately. Loiter brake jerk will control how quickly the drone starts decelerating and how quickly it reaches its maximum deceleration value. The maximum deceleration value is controlled by Loiter Brake Accel. And then the drone will decelerate at that constant rate of deceleration all the way until it's nearly stopped. And then Loiter Brake Jerk also controls how the drone kind of finishes off the deceleration and comes to a dead stop. The larger the value of Loiter Brake Jerk, the more rapidly the drone will come to a dead stop at the end of its braking maneuver, and the less drift you'll see at the end of the move. So these parameters are not really parameters that are tuned in the traditional sense, because there's no ideal value for a particular drone. It all comes down to the application and the pilot feel, how you want the drone to feel when it's flying around in loiter mode as to what these values should be. In general, higher values are going to make the drone respond more quickly, more aggressively. They're going to feel more responsive, but could make the drone feel twitchy if you take it too far. And if the values are too low, the drone will be very sluggish and slow to respond, and you'll see a lot of drift as you try and slow down to a dead stop. The tuning flights for this video are going to be conducted in loiter mode or position hold mode. And what you're going to want to do is to take off and then line the drone up north-south and east-west. And you're going to want to do some runs north-south, where you just fly the drone to the north, then immediately fly the drone back to the south as quickly as possible, and just go north, then south, then north, then south a few times with sharp changes of direction at the end of each of those legs. Then you're going to want to do the same in the east-west direction. So move east and then change direction sharply to fly west and back and forth. Do this without yawing the drone, so keep the drone pointed in one direction as you do these kind of shuttle runs. And then you're also going to want to do some moves where you climb as fast as possible and then descend as fast as possible. And again, you want to go up and down a few times with the sharpest possible change of direction at the top and bottom of those moves. In all cases, just a few meters back and forth or up and down is sufficient. You don't need more than that. And you want to capture the log so that we can review it and see how the drone is performing. Sitting above the Loiter controller is the horizontal velocity controller. And this takes a horizontal velocity and converts it into a target acceleration, which is passed to the Loiter controller. Now, this is another PID controller, so there are a number of terms that we can adjust, and you'll find them all in the full parameter list under PSC_VEL_PIDFF, and then there's also the error filter and derivative filter parameters as well. You'll notice there's no derivative feed forward or target filtering in the horizontal velocity controller, so we won't need to worry about any of that in this case. But tuning these PIDs can be important to get the drone to behave as snappily as possible and to track the velocity set point as close as it possibly can. Once you've done some tuning flights in loiter mode and you've done those north-south and east-west movements, you should have plenty of data in your logs to tune the horizontal velocity controller. You can find the time series data you need in the PID-E section, E for east-west, or the PID-N section, N for north-south. So that's why we did passes in both directions. And you should be able to tick the target for target velocity and actual for actual velocity to see how the controller is performing. Now, ideally, your actual velocity should sit nice and closely on top of your target velocity, perhaps ever so slightly delayed, and the actual velocity peak should be the same size, the same value as the target velocity peak. Now, at this point in the video series, you should be pretty familiar with tuning PID controllers based on time series data. So I'm not going to run through all of that process again. You can just watch some of the earlier parts of this video series where I go through that in detail. You're going to tune the horizontal velocity controller PID loop just like you have all the previous PID loops using time series data. You're going to adjust the PD balance to address any overshoot. So if we have a big overshoot where the actual far exceeds the target, you're going to reduce the P gain and maybe increase the D gain. And if you've got a very sluggish, slow response where the actual never reaches the value of the target during the sharp changes of direction, then you're also going to want to increase the P gain and reduce the D gain to address that. Once you've got the PD balance correct, so the magnitude of the actual and the magnitude of the target are the same at the peaks, then you're going to increase P, I, and D gains all together. So multiplying them all by 1.1 or 1.2, so they all increase in proportion to each other. And you're going to do that until you start seeing hints of oscillation or the whole thing just becomes too tightly wound, and then back off a little bit. You can tune the I term after that if necessary, although in many cases you won't need to tune the I term. And feed forward you shouldn't need to touch for the horizontal velocity controller because it's not a loop that typically requires any feed forward. Sitting above the horizontal velocity controller is the horizontal position controller. And once you've got the velocity controller well tuned, tuning the position controller shouldn't be too difficult at all because this is a simple proportional controller. It's only got a P term, and that P term is PSC underscore PSCXY underscore P. So there's just one parameter here. However, there are many other parameters which limit the so-called horizontal kinematic path that the drone can follow. So while the PID controller for horizontal position is easy to tune, it is really worthwhile learning all about these other parameters which will control how the drone behaves when it's following a horizontal path. The parameters with the biggest effect on the horizontal movement of the drone are Loit speed, Loit ac max, and PSC jerk XY. And I think these are easiest to explain with the help of a chart. So Loit speed controls the maximum speed that the drone moves in loiter mode. And so that's pretty easy to understand and pretty easy to tune. Just have the drone move at its maximum speed and decide if that's fast enough for your application or you need to change it. Loit ac max controls the maximum acceleration in loiter mode. So that indicates how fast the drone is going to accelerate up to its maximum speed. You can have a very high speed, but if acceleration is very low, it's going to take the drone a long time to reach that maximum speed. PSC underscore jerk underscore XY is a more subtle parameter. It controls how fast the drone reaches its maximum acceleration. So that controls sort of how quickly it gets going from a stop, and also how quickly it sort of finishes accelerating as it approaches maximum speed. If you increase PSC jerk XY, the drone will have a snappier response. It'll be particularly noticeable how fast the drone kind of gets moving when it's hovering, and then you move the stick, the drone will start accelerating and start moving more quickly with a higher PSC underscore jerk underscore XY value. If you set this too high, the drone may feel too twitchy and too aggressive and may tilt over really aggressively and suddenly when you start to move the stick to ask the drone to accelerate. So obviously that's something that you're going to have to just tune for yourself based on flight feel, your specific application, and how you want the drone to fly. It's more of a pilot feel parameter. Once you've got the parameters for the horizontal kinematic path generation set correctly, then usually the drone should be performing really well in loiter mode. However, you always want to check the horizontal position controller just to make sure that it's not oscillating or overshooting or anything like that. Usually the default values are okay, but it's always worth checking. To tune the horizontal position controller, you can use the data in PSCE for position east-west, or PSCN for position north-south. Obviously during the tuning flight, you'll have done some movements north-south and some movements east-west, so you can check both of them. You want to tick on target position east and position east, or target position north, depending on which you're looking at. And then just check that your actual position is following the target position nice and closely. If you're seeing significant overshoot or oscillation, then you might want to just reduce PSC underscore PSCXY underscore P, just to control that a little bit. Similarly, if you're seeing that really the drone is not responding to the changing in target position, you may want to increase that a little bit and see if it helps. In general, the default should be pretty good. So if you're needing to change it a lot, that might indicate that your drone is very different from the default settings, or that there are issues elsewhere in your tune. Here you can see that with the default value, I've got good tracking and overshoot is non-existent. So the P term is appropriate. Sitting above the vertical velocity controller is the vertical position controller. We've already covered tuning this in a previous video, but there are a lot of additional parameters which limit the velocity and acceleration targets for the vertical controllers. And this is called the kinematic path. And in this video, we're going to cover how to adjust those parameters to control the kinematic path. And we're also just going to very quickly recap tuning the vertical position controller as well. Tuning the vertical kinematic path parameters are really important for giving the drone the right flight feel when you're giving it vertical control inputs to change altitude. The parameters with the biggest effect on the vertical movement of the drone in Ardupilot are pilot speed up and down, pilot accel Z, and PSC jerk Z. Now, pilot speed up and pilot speed down are pretty self-explanatory. That controls the maximum vertical speed of the drone under pilot control, and there's two separate values, a maximum speed when climbing and a maximum speed when descending. Typically, you'll set the maximum speed when climbing higher than the maximum speed when descending because no one wants the drone dropping too fast. That could precipitate a crash. Pilot accel Z controls the maximum vertical acceleration under pilot control that the drone is ever going to have. So if we look at this chart here, which shows velocity against time, you can see that the pilot accel Z controls sort of the maximum rate of increase of velocity. PSC jerk Z is a bit more subtle. That controls how fast the drone reaches its maximum vertical acceleration. Increasing this value will make the drone feel more snappy. It'll get moving more quickly when you give it an instruction to climb or descend. Setting PSC jerk Z too high may make the drone feel too aggressive. It may feel like it leaps when you tell it to climb, or it drops very suddenly when you command it to descend. So you're going to need to tune that to make sure that it's the right balance of responsive whilst not being so snappy and so responsive that it makes the pilot nervous. Once you have the parameters set for the vertical kinematic path, you can take a look at the vertical position controller. And again, typically the defaults are fine here, but it's always worth checking just to make sure you're not seeing overshoot oscillation or a very sluggish response. To tune the vertical position controller, you're going to use the data in PSCD, which is position down, and you're going to tick on target position down and position down so that you can see the target and the actual of what the drone is doing. There's only a P term in this controller, so just check to see if there's significant overshoot or oscillation, and if there is, reduce PSC PSCZ underscore P a little bit to control that oscillation if it's there. If the drone is very, very sluggish and the target is way ahead of the actual, then you might want to try just increasing that P term and see if that helps sharpen up the response. Here is a log that I took with just the default P gain, and you can see that tracking is good and overshoot is near zero. So the default P term is appropriate for a typical 8-inch drone. Obviously, if you're tuning something much bigger or smaller than that, you may need to give it a bit of a different value. The Waypoint Navigation controller sits above all of the other controllers that we've talked about so far, and it controls how the drone behaves when it's autonomously navigating. All of the parameters for Waypoint Navigation can be found in Mission Planner, in the Config tab, full parameter list, and they all start with WPNav underscore. So if you search for that text string, then you'll find all of the Waypoint Navigation parameters. Again, there are no PID controllers in Waypoint Navigation. What we're looking at is parameters that control how the drone behaves when it's navigating between waypoints. Let's start by looking at the parameters that control the horizontal kinematic path generation in Waypoint Navigation mode. And these are the same type of parameters that we saw with the horizontal position controller. They're just called something else because now we're looking at autonomous waypoint navigation rather than pilot control. We've got WPNav jerk, which controls how quickly the drone reaches maximum acceleration and how fast it gets going from a standing start. This parameter can be quite important for how fast the drone can navigate between closely spaced waypoints, because obviously the drone is going to have to accelerate and then decelerate, and WPNav jerk controls how quickly it can do that. WPNav accel controls the drone's maximum horizontal acceleration. And so if you've got quite closely spaced waypoints or moderately spaced waypoints, then this value can have a big impact on how long it takes the drone to reach its top speed and therefore how quickly it's able to navigate between those waypoints. WPNav jerk also controls how quickly the acceleration tails off once you get close to WPNav speed, which is the cruise speed that the drone is going to hold between waypoints. If you've got distantly spaced waypoints, WPNav jerk and WPNav accel may not be too relevant for how long it takes you to navigate between the waypoints. WPNav speed is going to be more important. If you've got closely spaced waypoints where the drone may not even be able to reach its top speed, then WPNav jerk and WPNav accel are going to be a lot more important because that's going to determine how quickly the drone gets moving, how fast it accelerates, and how fast it decelerates at the other end. And if you've got close waypoints, those are probably the parameters that are going to control how fast the waypoints can be navigated between. WP-nav radius and WP-nav XLC are important parameters that control how the drone behaves when it gets close to and hits a waypoint. WP-nav radius controls how close the drone needs to get to the waypoint before it's marked as hit. Once the waypoint is marked as hit, the drone will then go on to the next waypoint and start heading towards there. So if you set WP-nav radius very large, you might find the drone doesn't get all that close to the waypoint before it then turns and heads on to the next one. WP-nav XLC controls the drone's maximum centripetal cornering acceleration. And this has an effect of both controlling the corner radius, but also controlling the maximum speed that the drone can move through the corner. So if you have a tight corner, the drone will actually slow down to take that corner in order to keep within the maximum cornering acceleration. So if you increase that value, that can allow the drone to take tighter corners more quickly. If you set that to a low value, you're going to end up with the drone either moving very slowly through the corner, or you're going to have corners with large radii so that the drone can keep moving at a high speed without having too much cornering acceleration. Again, these parameters are more tuned by flight feel and by how the drone is performing in the autonomous mission that you need it to complete. So there's not an ideal value. There's only an ideal value for your application, which you'll just find by trying increasing and decreasing these values and seeing how that affects the autonomous navigation performance of the drone. There are, of course, also parameters that control the vertical kinematic path generation in autonomous navigation mode. And some of these parameters are actually shared with the vertical position controller, and some of them are separate depending on whether you're doing waypoint navigation or pilot control. PSC jerk Z is just shared with the position controller, and it just controls how quickly the drone reaches its maximum vertical speed. That's going to be already set because you will have already set that for pilot control. WP-nav XLZ controls the maximum vertical acceleration of the drone under autonomous navigation. And so you could set that to be the same as under pilot control, more or less, depending on your application. And then you also have WP-nav speed up and WP-nav speed down, which are precise analogs of pilot speed up, pilot speed down, which just controls the vertical speed, the maximum vertical speed in autonomous navigation mode. And again, I would probably set the up speed higher than the down speed so that you don't have the drone dropping really quickly, because obviously that could precipitate a crash, especially because you want to give a pilot the opportunity to take control back from the drone if it's doing something wrong. And if the drone is dropping very quickly, the pilot's not going to have much chance to take over control before a crash. In many cases, it's appropriate to set the parameters for the autonomous waypoint navigation to be the same as the equivalent parameters for the pilot navigation, because often you're going to be tuning the drone under pilot control and you may not have an autonomous waypoint mission to test the tune. So you're going to set it up so that it's appropriate for pilot control and then just use the same parameters for the waypoint navigation. And you should find that the drone behaves exactly the same under autonomous navigation as it does under pilot control. And in many cases, that's going to be the ideal outcome. If you followed along with the tuning series up until this point, you should have a drone that is safe and responsive to fly, whether you're flying it in a manual mode, a fly-by-wire mode like stabilize or loiter, or whether you're navigating autonomously. And you should also know about all of the parameters that you need to adjust and how to adjust them to get any hobby grade Arducopter drone flying brilliantly. If, however, you're looking to tune something larger for a professional application, then you may still benefit from learning about some of the extra tools that are available in Arducopter and some of the extra parameters that you can adjust in order to get these much larger drones flying even better. And it's particularly important for big drones that are flying in demanding applications like commercial or industrial applications where the tune needs to be spot on, even in difficult weather conditions. If you're interested in that, I put a link down in the video description to my Arducopter tuning course, which has some additional content that covers these more sophisticated parameters and tools. And it also has some specific content designed for tuning much larger drones for professional, commercial, and industrial applications. Check that link out down in the video description and sign up to learn more about the course. And that's going to be what you need if you're working with these bigger drones. If you're just a hobbyist though, I really hope you enjoyed these videos and that maybe you'd sign up to my Patreon so that you can get hold of this whole tuning guide in PDF format. There's a link to that down in the video description as well. That's all I have for you for today. So until next time, I wish you all very, very happy flying.